Okay. Okay, cool.
All right. So today is June 29th, 2021. My name is Chelsea Lee, and I'm here with Dr. N. Eric Lindsay, who is a pediatrician at Blue Fish Pediatrics, and we will be conducting a full-length interview. So thank you so much for being here today, and let's get started. Let's start with your early life. Where and when were you born? And how would you describe the household that you grew up in?
Sure. So I was born in Houston at St. Luke's Hospital, and I was born November 25th, 1981. So my mom and dad, I'm an only child, so it's just me, my mom and dad. And my mom was Japanese American, and she was born in South Texas, like in the Rio Grande Valley. And my father was actually born in Louisiana, and his family's like English, French, Scottish, but they'd been in the U.S. for a long, long time. So yeah, and then had a wonderful childhood with my mom and dad, and my grandparents, my Japanese American grandparents living really close by. So kind of spent a lot of time at their house too.
Can you also describe a bit about the neighborhood that you grew up in?
Yeah. So I grew up in this neighborhood called like Willow Meadows in the Meyer Park area. So not too far from Rice, but kind of near Southwest Houston. And I guess I would just describe it as like a nice middle class neighborhood. It's a 1-story house, and kind of like I always felt pretty safe. Had a few friends, other guys in the neighborhood growing up, but I think my parents didn't think the public schools were as good. So I actually went to private school until high school. So I went to a really small private, kind of like a Montessori style school until 4th grade. And then this private school called St. Mark's Episcopal, 5th grade to 8th grade. And then I went to public high school.
Yeah. So what were your parents' occupations?
So my dad worked for the Houston Independent School District for as like most of his adult career, I think. He got a master's in journalism, and then uh, I mean, like as long as I can remember, he was working in the curriculum development department for the school. So he was an administrator, not a teacher or anything. But I guess like trying to help in the centralized HISD administration building, trying to help the schools and the local like principals and teachers figure out how to teach. One thing I know he worked on, but I think he didn't like it, I think he was frustrated, was over his career, there's a lot of transitioning to like standardized testing being the goal, like measuring performance at schools here by test scores and passing rates and everything. So I think he kind of experienced a lot of frustration with like the loss of autonomy for the schools, and as everything moved more towards just like teaching to a test, I guess. My mom worked for, so I think the story was she randomly, like, she went to the University of Houston and majored in English. And then I think she randomly found a job as a like secretarial kind of like typist work for this man who was going to be, I guess, starting his own company, like working on petrochemicals. And so I think it was just like the founder of the company, his wife, and then my mom was like their assistant. And then it turned into a pretty successful like petrochemical company. And so she actually retired as like a vice president of this, medium-sized company. And then that couple Their last name is Glasscock. They like funded the School of Continuing Studies at Rice because they both went to Rice. So she just happened to get in on the ground floor, I guess, of that, and she worked really hard and did a good job for them, I think.
Yeah. What would you say were some of the values that your parents emphasized during your upbringing?
I think like family togetherness was kind of a default value because it was just the three of us. And I don't know, they didn't have a lot of like, for example, my parents didn't grow up um, or didn't raise me with any like religious tradition or anything. So it was like pretty much just us and some other immediate family and stuff, but like a small circle of close family and friends rather than a big group. I didn't have a lot of like people coming in and out. So I think like depth of family ties was emphasized by default. And then, yeah, I guess just more like encouragement. They were actually very low pressure parents, like not ever really pushing much to like achieve academically or financially or anything. Um, and so it was more of just like vague, like be a good person and treat each other well and that kind of thing. So yeah, and then I think my parents had a wonderful marriage. My mom passed away in 2003, um, but yeah, I like always, I guess now when I think about it, I always think like, oh, they were really good at kind of like communicating with each other. Or I didn't see fighting, between them, and they seem to do a good job showing me that.
Yeah, yeah. How would you define your racial identity and how has it impacted you growing up?
Yeah, it was. I guess that was one of the reasons I wanted to do this, or I didn't want to do this. I would be running away from stuff like this. I think it's hard if you're of mixed racial ancestry to feel. I never felt very comfortable. Because I guess for me it was always like, oh well, I'm not going to find a community of people who look like me or have the same background as I do, because it's so specific. I guess like on the Japanese side, like I'm fourth generation, so most of my Japanese American relatives, like cousins or second cousins or whatever, are not, pure Japanese ancestry. And then, but then at the same time, there's no way to find like somebody who's the exact same level of Asian American identity or whatever. So when I was growing up, like I guess because I went to this tiny school and I had a small family, I never thought about it very much, which I think was nice. Um, and I really think, like thinking back, for example, I had this friend named Stefan from elementary school who I guess now I'm like Facebook friends with, but I didn't keep in touch with this guy for many, many years. And then I guess through social media or something, like we reconnected a long time later. But basically, I was talking to my dad about it, and I I guess my dad said something like maybe I showed pictures, and Stefan is a Black American man married to a white American woman. But basically, what came up in this conversation was that as a child, I didn't know he was Black. Like I didn't remember that about him, but I used to like go to his house and hang out with him, and we'd play together, whatever. So I guess I think, oh well, that was cool. Like I was able to grow up without any major concept of that people are different from each other.
Yeah.
Um, so I think when I got to high school, though, I really, because that's when it was like a big public, it's Bel Air High School here in town. It's like a pretty big public school. And I think that's when I saw like all these different identities that people had. And I guess I ended up hanging out with, there are a lot of like Jewish American people there, and then a lot of like Chinese or Taiwanese. Um, and then yeah, and then it's like I think Bel Air is a pretty diverse school. Like there's like South Asian, East Asian, Black, Hispanic, Latino people and everything. So yeah, I guess I just felt like, oh, now I see people kind of like segregating themselves or having this identity that's really important, and I didn't really think that was a big deal. Um, but it kind of became a bigger deal. And so, yeah, so I started like researching it more, I guess. I spent a long time, I think it was for a school project in eighth grade or ninth grade. I spent a long time like interviewing my Japanese American grandparents about their life and stuff, and learned about a lot of the issues they went through in World War II. And I got more involved in the Japanese American Citizens League, like the civic organization.
Mm.
Um, yeah, it was in high school because then I got a scholarship from them for college. So. And then I had a white American friend who just randomly started studying Mandarin in high school. And then he like started teaching me some. And so then I took Mandarin, Chinese, and then Japanese at Rice. So I think through all of that, like meeting a lot of different people, and then specifically meeting a lot of Asian immigrants, like first generation, or most of my friends who were born in the US, their parents were immigrants, they were second generation. Um, it made me like think a lot more about it. Like, okay, I'm not going to fit in with
Mhm.
necessarily everybody else because I have a different story, but like, what is the story, or what does it mean? Or, um, so I guess it's now I think I used to see it as like not a weakness, but something to overcome. And
Mhm.
now it's like, okay, I guess it should be a strength because at least if I don't fit in the same box, then I get to talk about it and figure it out and help other people understand a broader concept than maybe whatever they've been exposed to so far.
Yeah, for sure. Um, did you ever feel like you might have identified with like one part more than the other, or like you spoke about different groups at school? Like, did you think you fit in better with one group over another, something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess essentially what happened was I ended up like I started out thinking, well, there's no point in trying to like fit in a certain group or whatever. But then by say the end of high school, for sure, like I think the majority of my friend group was comprised of Asian American people, like again, mostly like probably mostly Taiwanese, second generation Taiwanese American people. So I don't know, that was kind of random. Like it's just, you meet one person and then you get introduced to their friends and then you start hanging out with them and stuff. And so yeah, it happened that way. Um, and then I guess maybe I did feel like I think fitting in was easier with Asian American friends than like other kinds of ethnic group friends. Yeah, and for example, I remember very distinctly like my mom didn't speak Japanese, even my grandmother barely spoke Japanese, but like when I got to college, I was like, okay, I really want to study Japanese, like because people always ask me, "What are you?" And I have to say I'm half Japanese and half white, and they say, "Oh, well, did you grow up there? Do you speak the language, whatever?" And I have to be like, "No, my great grandparents immigrated from Japan," but it's like I don't know. It to me, it always felt kind of disappointing to tell somebody like, "Oh no, I don't speak the language of my ancestry or whatever." So as a sophomore at Rice, I started taking Japanese, and then I was very into like Japanese cars, like modified cars.
Mhm.
And I was reading a car magazine one day and sitting across from my parents at the dinner table, and I like found this ad and I showed it to my parents, and it said like, "Oh, if I think for like $1,400 you could spend a week in Japan with the car magazine, like the journalists at the Tokyo like car show."
Yeah.
So I was kind of like half joking, like, "Oh, I should do this." It's during my Christmas like holiday break from Rice,
Mhm.
and then yeah, to my surprise, my dad was like, "Okay, yeah, we'll pay for that if you want to go."
Oh, wow.
So I guess that's when it got really real because I was like, "Okay, I should go to Japan, and then I guess I'll understand myself better."
Yeah.
And I really do think I don't know, like mentally understood the culture, like it made intuitive sense to me somehow. Not like not like I am a Japanese person, but I guess like
Mhm.
I think the way I think is very compatible with the way the average Japanese person in Japan thinks. And so I felt really comfortable, relatively comfortable, more so than when I've traveled to other countries, I guess. And so that was the first time I went. So it's like 2001. Um, and then, yeah, and then I just really fell in love with it. So I was like, okay, I gotta do more with this. So I continued studying the language and studied abroad there and went back for a lot of trips to Japan and stuff. So I think, yeah, like I think I did resonate to some extent with Asian Americans in the US, but then I also knew like, oh, when I went to Japan, I felt something like there is this part of my identity that like makes sense um, in this culture.
Yeah. So I guess kind of moving back to like your parents and their backgrounds. Um, sorry, did you mention that your mother was fourth
Uh,
generation?
she was third, so I'm fourth.
Okay, so you're fourth. Okay. So how did your parents meet?
Yeah, so they were both married before and then divorced, and this was their second marriage to each other. My mom and my aunt, like she and her sister grew up like basically my grandparents, the Japanese side grandparents were farmers. Um, and so they grew up like in a predominantly like Spanish speaking farming community in South Texas. And then I guess when they grew up, I think my grandparents instilled in them like this notion of like, we're trying to create a better life for you. So we don't want you to stay here and be farmers. And so like I know my aunt was the valedictorian of their high school, and I think my mom was like, you know, very academically did well too. So they came to Houston, to the University of Houston, to go to college here. Um, so eventually, after both my aunt and then my mom came to Houston for college and stayed here, then actually my grandparents sold their farm and stuff and then moved to follow. So my mom met and married this guy that I think she met in college. Like she was pretty young, I think. And then I think she already had gotten divorced like by 24 or something. So she was pretty young as far as, I mean, by my perspective now. And then my dad really does not like to talk about his first marriage. So I don't know much about that, but basically I know that my parents met so I think she was in her late 20s, he was in his early 30s, and they like had a mutual friend. There was this lady named Maddie, because I know we would go when I was a kid and watch movies with Maddie and her husband and stuff. And so it was this mutual friend. And later I found out like, oh, that's actually the woman that introduced my parents to each other. But yeah, they just got set up, I guess, on a blind date by this woman. I don't know. I think she worked with my father in some capacity, but I don't know how she met my mom. So it was just a random friend group thing.
That's cute. Yeah. So did your mother's side of the family face any like discrimination during World War II? And
Yeah, so my grandfather, his side of the family, he was born in California. Um, so he and many of my grandfather's side of the family, like he had like a lot of siblings, I think, like 8 or something, um, were interned in internment camps in Arizona, I believe, um, which I found out about in high school. Um, or I found out more because I was doing that Japanese American Citizens League work. But what I remember actually from being younger was I think in like the very end of the 80s or no, I think it was the early 90s, because I think it was President George H. Bush. They passed this like reparations bill, and they sent a check for like $10,000 or something to people who had been interned. And so my grandfather actually got it. But what I remembered as a kid was he put this check from the bank on the wall in a frame.
Oh, wow.
And so I guess he cashed it and this was like a copy or something. I'm not sure. But, as a kid, like, I just remember looking up and being like, why do you have like money on the wall? Like, why did you frame a check? And they kind of explained like something about the family or whatever.
Wow.
So my grandmother's side of the family, like, I guess she was born in 1920, uh, 26. So yeah, so I guess she was a teenager. So she was in an internment camp too. I don't know where, um, but it was. I think for her it was like a shorter time period or whatever. She didn't talk about. My grandfather talked about like I think the hardships of that.
Yeah.
My grandmother didn't. I think because she was younger, at the time. But what she did talk about was basically like losing everything. I think that her father's, my great grandfather, had kind of like built up like his own farm and property or whatever. And I think most of it was like kind of seized and they had to restart life again after World War II ended. Um,
Wow.
and then, yeah, when my grandmother and grandfather married, I guess the decision was made that he would join her side of the family in Texas rather than like she go to California.
Mm.
So yeah, they did, and I think maybe like, I mean, even my dad's side of the family, like the the ones who are always in the U.S., like they're kind of very stoic, and I think when you encountered like a World War II veteran person, they usually didn't talk much about the hardships. So I didn't grow up hearing much about it. Um, but yeah, now when I think about like what that would be like or how difficult it would be for me to go through what they went through, then I admire them a lot for, you know, coming out of it, I guess, with still like a good attitude. And I guess, I have a lot of friends whose parents or grandparents were basically either interned or they decided to serve in the military, to try to get out of the internment camp to like be one of in the Japanese American um, divisions of the army and stuff.
Mm.
And so, I mean, there's a lot of really cool stories I've heard, or like stories of valor and bravery. And so I think it's cool that now I can come back and try to learn about that. But at the same time, like, it's been a long time that now both of my grandparents are gone, so I can't like interview them,
Mm.
which would have been nice. But on the other hand, I don't know that my grandfather would have talked much about his real feelings.
Yeah.
So yes, I know they went through a lot. I didn't hear much about it. They like just like to keep their nose to the grindstone, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess kind of moving on to your college experience, um, you attended Rice University and majored in economics and managerial studies. What like attracted you to choose these majors specifically?
Yeah, I guess that was random too. So I don't know. I think because in contrast to a lot of my Asian American friends, my parents were very like laissez-faire about everything, like just kind of like do your best and work hard or whatever, but definitely not like a hardcore tiger mom kind of experience. Um, when I got into Rice, I was real happy, but I was pretty unfocused. So originally, I vaguely thought, okay, I think I should either try to work in like a business field, like or finance or something. I guess economics was my favorite class at the end of high school. Like when you take like brief little bit of economics. So I thought, okay, well that's cool. Like I can do that. But notably, I always worked much harder to do okay in math. I didn't like math, and the higher you go in econ, the more mathematical theory and difficult math you encounter. I found out. And then the other side was, I guess my parents kind of jokingly always said I could be a lawyer because I like to argue. Um, and then I was good at writing and like English and stuff. So I thought, okay, maybe I'll see what it's like to go to law school, or what would be entailed if I were pre-law. And so when I started, that was my thought. And I actually started out thinking I would do econ and then political science because it seemed appropriate for a pre-law kind of career. And I did pretty well in the first few, the first couple years worth of economics classes. But the political science, like pretty much as soon as I started in college and started taking some of those classes, I was like, this is not for me. Like I don't love politics or like keeping up with it and kind of arguing over minutiae and in the law or whatever. Like so I decided to jump ship, and then I don't know, I took a bunch of random classes. I used the Rice, like you could take a pass fail class, you know, and then like decide to uncover it or keep it covered. I used it like every single semester, and then tried all kinds of random, took an electrical engineering class and all kinds of random stuff. And then I took the Chinese as a freshman on a whim. I would have taken Japanese as a freshman, but it conflicted with an econ required class. And then I did really well in that. And so, yeah, I was just kind of like bumbling around trying stuff, I guess. And then, so when I studied abroad, I spent my junior year, you know, in Japan, and actually I think I took one economics class in Japan that did actually count as a away econ class for my Rice major. But when I came back, and I guess I talked to my advisor or something, but they're like, oh, you got like 30 hours of classes from this one year that would count for an Asian studies major. And they said that. And so I said, oh, yeah, okay. So as a senior, I took Asia, whatever it's called, like 112 or something, which is like Introduction to Asian Studies. And then continued taking both Chinese and Japanese languages and stuff. And then I thought I would also get an Asian studies major, but then when I was graduating, they said, oh yeah, you totally got all the requirements done, but not enough were done at Rice University. So you can't like claim an Asian studies major. So I like to point out I should have an asterisk and say, technically I fulfilled the requirements for Asian studies as well, because it was a big part of what I studied. And then so by that time, like when I was a senior, I was like taking economics classes, but I wasn't loving them as much. And so I was kind of struggling with what to do. And I applied for like Teach for America because I thought I like teaching, maybe that would be good. And then I applied for like different kinds of jobs, and I had made some contacts in Japan, and I thought like I'll reach out and see if anybody wants to hire me to like work, you know, as like a whatever intro level kind of businessman, analyst, something, consultant. But I wasn't having much luck. Like I had some phone interviews and stuff, and I still like cars, so I thought, oh, it'd be really cool if, you know, I could work for one of the Japanese car companies here somewhere, which, yeah. Anyway, so I put all these like feelers out, and then went on a I went on a medical mission trip for spring break of my senior year because I was interested in dating this girl who was going, and I didn't have spring break plans. And so she said they needed people who spoke Spanish to like go and translate. Because like as you probably know, there's like a million pre-med students at Rice, and so it was easy to assemble this with like the McGovern, like UT Health med school. They would take a bunch of med students and then a bunch of Rice students who were like pre-med, I guess, and a few like fully trained doctors to go do like free medical clinics and stuff. And so I said, well, I studied Chinese and Japanese in college, but I did take like through Spanish 5 in high school. So I just like furiously crammed like a medical Spanish dictionary. And then I went on this trip kind of on a whim. It was like a Rice Baptist student ministry trip. And and then like immediately I fell in love with that, and I was like, oh man, I should totally go to med school because this work is so fulfilling. And um, I don't know, I think I had kind of flirted with that idea, like, oh, like I could be a doctor, but then I just always didn't because of laziness. Like I was like, it just sounds so hard. It's such a long road and whatever. And again, my parents would never push me, right? They were just like, okay, yeah, yeah. And so this trip was like, let's say there were 10 med students, and like 9 of them were from the McGovern UT Houston school, but one med student was from Baylor College of Medicine, and he had gone to Rice, and he had been an electrical engineer, or maybe chemical engineer. He'd been an engineer and he worked for 2 years, and then he decided to go to med school, and he like went back and had to take some prereqs and stuff at U of H. So basically, this guy told me, oh, if you're thinking about that, even though you're about to graduate from Rice, like it's not too late, and I can tell you exactly how I did it. So that was cool. I felt like that was like a sign or something. So basically, I did exactly what he told me to do, and then went to Baylor like he did, and he was still there. So I saw him there, and I was like, hey, thanks for the advice. So yeah, so I had a winding path through college, but I think I really loved it. Like I loved being at Rice, and I made a lot of good like lifelong friends, and I think it just did a good job for me of expanding my horizons. And kind of like I think about, oh well, if I had entered college and been pre-med, I don't think I would have worked hard enough. Like I wouldn't have understood the value, and it took me all that time and all that exploration of myself and the world and stuff to get to a point where I felt like, okay, I know what I want to do with my life, and I'm willing to work hard to achieve that.
So did you have to take some extra prereqs towards like the end of your college career for pre-med?
Yeah, well, so basically that medical mission trip happened spring break. So I was already, like 1/3 of the way done with my second semester of senior year. So I, for med school, like I had only completed like a year of English, a year of calculus, and a year of biology from AP tests in high school. Like essentially almost nothing I did in college was useful for medical school. So as soon as I graduated, I started taking summer school classes, and I did all of the prereqs at U of H. Because the scheduling was like way more flexible. Like essentially at Rice, if you want to be a pre-med, obviously it is a well-worn path, and you have great teachers and everything, but like it's kind of like there's one section of each thing you have to do, like this step-by-step process. So I realized like I just don't think, like it's just going to take a lot longer, and it's like also much more expensive and whatever. So, and what that med student from Baylor had taught me was like, oh, if you go to U of H, like it's just a lot more flexible. So yeah, so I just started as soon as I graduated from Rice. Like I think I graduated May 17th, and summer school started May 31st, with chemistry 101 or whatever. And then I took summer, fall, spring, summer, fall, and that was enough. But I had to take like everything at the same time. And I had to take the MCAT before I had a chance to finish the science classes. So that was challenging. But it worked out fine. So yeah.
So you mentioned that you enjoyed your experience at Rice. What would you say were your like most favorite or least favorite parts of your experience?
Yeah, I think what I liked was the ability to like meet a lot of people and hang out. I still like to hang out with a lot of different people, like variety wise, or like put like if I know these two people from one way, and then it's like, oh, I was going to eat dinner with this guy and they don't know each other, I like to put them together or like try to make that happen. And I felt like that's extremely easy in college because you can, you have like a servery where you're eating together, or you can do like athletic things together, or I don't know, I spent a lot of time playing ping pong and pool and video games with people in their rooms or in the commons or whatever. But like, I guess I liked the volume of meeting people. And it's, it's all kind of like everybody's figuring themselves out. Everybody's similar, like for the most part. So none of it felt weird or forced or anything. And then, yeah, I think it was really nice that Rice had things like the pass fail option, or yeah, just the ability to take all these random classes that I did to figure out what it was I wanted to do. I think, for example, one of my good friends is she she went to UT Austin, but she married the guy that became like my best friend from Rice when they met later. And she's also a physician now, but she talked about how like from day one in college, she had to like think about like, okay, I want to go to medical school. I have to take these classes and those classes, and I have to talk to this like advising group, and I have to whatever. And she just felt like more of a cog in a wheel, like a big system. And it's just a really big school, and it's a great school, but it's just different. Versus when I went back, like I remember being kind of like nervous or like kind of ashamed of myself to go back to my parents and say like, hey, you know how I'm graduating from college in like 2 months, but I actually decided I'd like to go to med school. So that would kind of extend that by like a couple years plus 4 years of med school and whatever, right? But of course, my parents were like, "Oh no, we'll be so proud of you. We support you. It's fine." And I felt the same way, a little like awkward about Rice's, because I had to go like do the academic advising, like pre-med people as a graduated, alumnus. So I was like, wonder what they're gonna think of me, because I'm going to be like, hey, I totally wasn't thinking about this at all, and now I really want to do it. And I know you have a bunch of other pre-meds in here who've been like gung-ho from the beginning, and their stuff way more organized than I do. But again, like they were very supportive. And it just so happened that one of the professors who was in that department, like academic advising for the pre-med people and stuff, she was my accounting professor. And I happened to still like make an A in that class out of my econ classes when I started like not caring as much. So I was like, oh, thank the Lord, like this is the one lady that did like me as an econ major. But yeah, but again, I felt completely like supported and stuff by the Rice people. So I think it just helped that it was small. And they could kind of take time to individually hear my story and like say, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Like you had to find your path, and we're going to help you on the rest of your journey. So yeah, so I guess I just felt like in general a lot of support. And there were hard times where I think people get too serious and work really, really hard, or get too anxious. But at the same time, like most of my Rice friends were happy and having fun through the process, and turned out to be amazing adults.
You also spent a year studying abroad in Japan. How was this experience like for you?
Yeah, that was like, I guess, pretty awesome and very formative, I think, because I guess having grown up in Houston and never left, I think it was pretty critical that I did something else that I had to do, like, striking out on my own. Um, and I guess that was another thing. I'm very thankful that Rice even had this whole thing. Like, they had a really good relationship with that university, Kyushu University. So it was like it was a true exchange program. Like there were 4 of us Rice students who went, and there were, I think, 3 or 4 students from Kyushu University who came back to Rice. And so actually I didn't have to pay tuition that whole year, because that's how the exchange works, I guess. And yeah, what I learned, because there were a lot of students, I think it was about 25, maybe total students in this program. Um, and maybe 10 of them were, let's say 12 of them probably were from the US. So like maybe half was American students, but from different parts of the US. And then the other half, they were people from all over the world, like some other Asian universities and a lot of European, like a few British universities and a few French universities and a German girl and a few guys from Belgium. Um, so like you had to do all these classes in English. That was the requirement. But you could come from anywhere you wanted as long as you could take college classes in English. And then if you could speak Japanese, you could of course take anything on their college campus that they offered in Japanese. So it was a really cool setup, and I think that it was nice that I got to like learn about Japan and live in Japan, but I also ended up learning a lot from those other international people. And I was there from 2001 to 2002. And so actually I went to start that program right after the 9/11 terrorist attacks here. And so I think it was a good time to kind of be expanding my world horizons and having some perspective on kind of what was going on. Like when I came back, like the US decided to like invade Iraq and like, just I think it just there's some bad things that came out of that. There's some good things that came out of that. But it was good that I had just spent all this time learning about like, oh well, here's what these like Belgian people think about my country or think about the Middle East. And obviously I wanted the Japanese perspective on that and I got that, but it was nice to get the perspective of other people too. Um, and then I had like a stipend and my parents gave me money. So they would let you live in this like international housing kind of apartment, um, which was a single, like by yourself. And then like I went to this international church there, which was like also, there were a lot of like Filipino people actually, but it was a lot of like people from all over the place. Um, and yeah, I tried to cook a little bit. I'm much better at cooking now, I think, but yeah, just that was when I had to be really independent because it wasn't a dorm with a meal plan. And um, I, I really only knew one of the Rice, like a girl who was at Rice. I had at least met her before, but like I didn't know anybody else. So I had a host family that I got to know really well. And yeah, I think it helped me become a lot more mature and flexible and broaden my horizons about a lot of things. So yeah, I think it was a pretty critical time in my life.
Yeah. So yeah, kind of, I guess going back to your process of applying to medical school and stuff like that. You were a medical assistant to Dr. Jun and Dr. Piela when Blue Fish was founded in like 2005. What was this kind of like again?
Yeah. So the church I was going to here was predominantly Korean American people, and so Dr. Jung he is the son of a pediatrician, and he went there, and so his father started this practice, and then he like finished his training and then joined his father. So I guess and he's just a very open, nice, like great person. So as far as like in 2003, when I started thinking like, okay, I'm trying to apply to med school, whatever, like I knew I should really like get some experience like shadowing some clinic or something, because again, I knew that when I applied to med school, I was going to get some questions about like, how did you get here? Or how do you know that this is what you want to do when you've done all this other stuff before that's not what you want to do apparently. So it was really great working for him. And briefly, I worked for his father before his father retired too. Like they were together. And then he knew Dr. Pilop from his residency training, and they decided to start the practice for Bluefish. They decided to start it together. Um, so yeah, it's kind of, again, I guess I think about it like my mom's story. Like I started out just asking him like, hey, can I come when I don't have classes at U of H or whatever, and like, shadow you and see what you do. And then, but I tried to be very helpful and tried to, like, I was all gung ho, interested, enthusiastic, right? So then he said, oh, well, I'll just, put you on the payroll if you want to work whenever you can, like part time. So I really appreciated that. And then um, it just so happened that I was there for 2003 to 2005 when he decided to start a new practice with a new partner. And so I think, again, that was really cool for me to see, because like a lot of medical students or whatever, you're not going to have an experience seeing how a practice gets built. Like they had to, like, they took me along. I remember like architecture meeting to like talk about planning the office, like how many rooms are we going to have and where we're going to put the refrigerator and whatever. So I got to see stuff like that. And then when I got into med school, they were obviously very happy for me. So I said bye, but I did jokingly say like, maybe I'll see you in 8 years. Um, and then uh, I guess I kept in touch because I would still see Dr. Jung um, from church and stuff. And then I got married and had children and went to him as the pediatrician while I was still in training. And so I guess when I finished residency, I was like, okay, actually, like, would you guys want me to work with you? And they said, no, we don't have a spot for you. Sorry, we're too full. So I was kind of like sad, but I mean, I didn't really think that was going to work out. So I worked for Texas Children's Pediatrics for a year and a half or 2 years or so. Um, and then Dr. Jung called me and said, oh, this other guy's moving to Dallas. Like, if you could take his spot, then we'd love to have you work here. So yeah, I kind of couldn't believe that worked out. But I think the thing that made me think like, this is where I'm supposed to be, is that his father, who was a Korean immigrant doctor, um, had a lot of Korean speaking patients, of course, but then like randomly hired for his like secretarial work and stuff, like front office needs, hired a Japanese woman. And so she, I guess, and then there was a Korean OB-GYN who grew up in the occupation era of Korea when Koreans were forced to learn Japanese. So that doctor spoke Japanese very fluently. I think he went to like university and medical school in Japan, actually. So he spoke Korean and Japanese fluently. And he would deliver babies and tell his Korean buddy, Senior Dr. Jung, like, oh, you should, if you had a Japanese speaking like staff member, then you could take care of all these Japanese babies that I deliver to Japanese like expats living in Houston. So he did. And then that woman, Miss Masako, she worked there when I worked there the first time, and she actually didn't retire till I came back as a doctor, because she worked for like 30 years for them. And so now I actually do use Japanese like every day that I'm at work, and take care of, like, I guess from what other Japanese doctors in Houston have told me, there's no other Japanese speaking pediatrician in Houston. So I guess I was able to fill this niche of work, even, and then I guess it just made me feel thankful, because it's like, I always struggled a little bit at the end of college. I was like, am I throwing away all that language study I did and Asian studies and stuff? Like, was it all for naught? I mean, it's fine, right? Like, but I think I am very thankful to have found a way to use that even as a doctor nowadays.
Yeah, wow. So you attended Baylor College of Medicine, um, and you also did your residency training at Baylor as well. Can you take me through like your experiences?
Yeah, I guess I don't know. Medical school is like people joke that it's like high school. It's more like high school than college because my class was like 150-ish students or something, and like a lot of med schools are around there, like 150 to 200. So it's not as big as a college, class by any means. But more importantly, you go like it's 4 years of this smaller group of people doing the exact same thing. Um, so again, in college, you sit down for lunch and you're like, oh, what's your major? What's your major? And where'd you grow up? Where'd you come from? Whatever. Um, and you could have this engineer with the pre-med, with the literature, history person, like all kind of doing whatever, the athlete, scholarship basketball player right there. Med school was like literally everybody's there for the same exact thing and taking the same exact class together every day, right? Um, and so I guess I found it kind of funny, like interesting, but I think it helped me again to be a couple of years older, because I didn't come right out of college, and I hadn't really worked, like in the sense of like I wasn't on my own having to sustain myself, but I had worked at the pediatric office, like, and then I did a lot of like tutoring and stuff, like just trying to make extra money. So I guess I felt like, again, that the original mentor guy who had been an engineer for a couple years, he told me like, I think it's good when you go out in the world and then you come back and you say, okay, I want to go to medical school, because if all you've ever done is go to school, then you will have the perspective of like, this is a continuation of school. But he said for him, it was like he got there and he said, I already know what it's like to be done with school and work. And I'm comfortable treating school like I did my work, where I showed up and I worked from 8:30 to 5 p.m. And put in hard work every day. And so it wasn't like, I guess, you can like party for a while and then cram for a test and then come back and like skip this class but attend that class or whatever. He was really dedicated, and so I think that stuck with me too. And I just do better, like slowly but surely chipping away at things and like not procrastinating. So for me it was, I think I tried to do a good job of like keeping up with the academic learning and not like getting overwhelmed, like not cramming or not being too anxious about like, can I really learn all this? But I definitely had those feelings sometimes, and I think also I had a good perspective about just kind of like we're all in the same boat. If hopefully they won't give me an impossible task because everybody else has to do this too, or everybody who's done it before already went through this, even though it seems sometimes like overwhelming. um, so yeah, I again, I really liked Baylor. I think Baylor as a med school, like they're kind of really good about prioritizing the education part without like forcing unnecessary suffering, for the sake of just, yeah, like I think medicine has a hierarchical, like kind of maybe like the military like philosophy of like, if you're on the bottom you need to get hazed a little bit, and then when you make it to this level that we're at, then you'll get to open up a little bit and have a little more freedom. um, but I think that's like a very old school thinking, and it's not actually very educational, it's just punitive. um, so I think Baylor was pretty good about already being on the forefront of being more just nice, like, hey, we're all here to teach you and you're here to learn. So as long as you do your part, then we're not going to put you through unnecessary roughness. And then, yeah, and like pediatrics is obviously a more happy, nice place to be than um, some fields of medicine anyway. So yeah, I loved being at like Texas Children's Hospital and being a part of that. And I think for medicine, it's kind of one of those things where you should find the people that are like you. Like And so if you look at this type of doctor, you have to think like, okay, would I like to do that job every day? Does it academically interest me? Do I take care of those patients? But also you should look at the doctors you would be working with or for and think like, are these people I could see myself aligning with and stuff? Um, because both of those things are hard. Like you can't have a job where you're like, oh, well, I love who I work with, but I can't stand what I do every day. And you can't have a job where even if you're like, oh, this is really cool, like I do this awesome thing, like I do this procedure every day, whatever, but you're miserable with all your colleagues or you're so different from all of them that it's gonna like grate. Um, you're gonna always be swimming upstream. So I felt like that's how it was for me with pediatrics. Like I wasn't really planning on that. Like again, I randomly asked Dr. Jung to shadow, right? But um, having seen that, having worked there, and then going back through the whole process and seeing all these other fields of medicine or whatever, I was like, okay, well, I actually think that is my home. Like that's where I was comfortable and where I felt like I could contribute and where I belonged.
Yeah. So I guess what was it kind of like to work for Texas Children's, um, and like working with children, and like what type of patients would you like receive, I guess?
Yeah, it's interesting. So TCH is a huge children's hospital. I guess in many measures, it is the largest children's hospital in the U.S. And one in the world. Um, so the benefit of that is that you receive patients from all over the world, but certainly like the region for very difficult medical cases. So like extreme premature patients or very complicated inborn errors of metabolism, like genetic mutations or heart malformations and stuff, where like there are only a few maybe surgeons who can correct this particular thing, or there's only a few like PhD, MD combo experts who can treat this very difficult disorder or something. So I really liked having the opportunity to learn from those researchers and physician scientists and stuff. I think at the same time, like the downside of that is Texas Children's in residency, I didn't see as many of the like normal um, children's problems or even like healthy children because it's like a place where you go when you're in a really bad spot and then they make you better, but it's not the place you necessarily need to go for like a regular old broken bone kind of thing. um, so I think there was a Rice engineer who told me this story too. That was his philosophy, was if I do this very difficult engineering program at Rice, he was a elec major, um, they're pushing me really hard to like do these theoretical um, experiments and like things that are so far out of like what I would actually do as a day-to-day engineer. But he said, I realized the point is if I prove I can do this, then I could do anything. And if I go work for a company and they say, oh, you like were pushed through to the limit and then beyond, and actually all we really needed was to know you could be comfortable here, then I'd be like a great person to hire.
Yeah.
And so I felt like that's kind of how I wanted to be as a doctor, was like um, I could I felt very stretched, I guess, in the ER or in the intensive care unit, like taking care of super ill children, like taking care of children with cancer or who've been like had a bone marrow transplant. Like sometimes it's very crushing because unlike adult medicine, the children almost never brought this on themselves. Like they didn't do anything wrong and they randomly were born with this difference in this mutation in their genes, or this accident happened to them or whatever, or their parents well-meaning or not harmed them or something. Like there's a lot of sad cases, but again, on the flip side of that, I always felt like motivated because I think since the default for children is to adapt well and like be happy and, seek a good life for themselves, I felt like, okay, well, at least no matter what happened to bring somebody to this point, if I can inflect their life in a better direction, then they have many years to go forward and be healthy or, make a great life for themselves. Versus when I did like rotations at St. Luke's Hospital or um, Methodist Hospital or something, it was like a lot of it was like, okay, look, you're 85 years old. We want your remaining time here to be comfortable. But it was just like twiddling a little bit, like, or it was really challenging because there's so many things to balance. Like if an adult gets to an old age, they tend to have 10 old medical problems that you have to take into consideration when you're trying to fix their one new medical problem. And so it can be really challenging. And I think a lot of doctors sometimes think like, I don't really know if I did any good here. Like, we're just kind of trying to keep the ship afloat when there's new holes popping up in it. But children usually don't give that vibe. It's much more hopeful, like, hey, we have a problem here, we're going to fix it. Sometimes it's really hard to do so, but that's always kind of the main goal. And but yeah, so huge variety of patients, I guess. And again, I'm thankful that I had the opportunity to work at TCH. And I did, when I interviewed for residency, like when I finished med school, I thought I would want to stay at Baylor for residency, but I did interview and apply to other places and like kind of research a lot. And my interviews were in Los Angeles, like a few hospitals in the Southern California area. And it was so different. Like I loved visiting LA and stuff, but the children's hospitals were much smaller, and they're still awesome. But I was like, ooh, I think I'm just too used to being at the big show at TCH. And like, yeah, I don't want to, I'm not saying you can't learn well that way. I'm just saying for me, I think it was, a good fit. And I was very proud to be affiliated with them and stuff.
Yeah. You also then became a clinical assistant professor at Baylor. I guess what was your favorite part of teaching and like mentoring medical students?
Yeah, I don't know. I think I always liked teaching. I always wanted to be a father, and I always liked, I don't know, feeling like I was contributing to the next generation or something. So, yeah, um, when you're a pediatric resident or any medicine resident, I guess you have to have a continuity clinic because so much of your residency is spent in the hospital with the really, really sick cases. But part of learning to be like an internal medicine physician or a pediatrician is learning to take care of like regular day-to-day stuff in a clinic, not just critically ill patients in the hospital. So once a week you have a continuity clinic, and so mine was at Texas Children's. And so I guess it just so happens that when you do that, you get to know the professors who are like, in the general pediatrics division or whatever. And so when I was graduating, they kind of like grabbed each of us before we're like finishing residency, and they're like, hey, where are you going to work? And please, will you take medical students to, rotate through your clinic and stuff? Because I guess they're always seeking more spots and more opportunities where they can send students to learn. But for me, it was pretty easy to say yes because I felt like I bumbled through college, never knowing I wanted to be a doctor anyway. And then I'm only where I'm at today because like Dr. Jung let me come and follow him. And then B, I always feel like I owe it to Baylor and Texas Children's and stuff to like try to help their medical students. Because again, it's like, well, I wouldn't be where I am today without that school letting me in and, giving me all the opportunities they gave me. So I think I think that is a Japanese thing too, honestly, is like, I have a lot of sense of like duty, like I have to pay back this debt I owed. And I'm always like thinking about like, oh, okay, so and so did this for me, or then I have to do this for them. Or if somebody gave me a gift, I have to think about like, oh, I should make sure I show them how I appreciate that gift or something. So probably through that or something, I immediately said, sure, I'll try to have med students wherever I go. And so at the first clinic I worked at, like that Texas Children's Pediatrics Clinic, I had med students come. Like one of the most gratifying things was I remember it was a guy, because pediatrics is 75, 80% female. And so it's unusual to have male pediatricians. Um, and so I had a male med student come to rotate at my clinic, and I said, oh, well, what do you think you want to go into? What specialty? And he was like, I really don't know. I haven't decided. I was like, okay, well, that's cool. Like, keep an open mind or whatever. And then, like 2 years later, or I guess it was 1 year later or something, he emailed me and said he actually had decided to go into pediatrics. And I think he wanted me to write a letter, or he just wanted to let me know. And then he ended up staying and doing his residency at Baylor and TCH, as I saw his name on the roster or something the following year. So I guess I felt like, oh man, like I don't think I'm solely responsible for that guy's career or whatever, but it was really cool to be a part of it. And then to think like, yeah, I want to be a good example. And I already feel like I owe it to these people to give something back. And if you get the feedback from the students that like, oh, this was a great place to go and learn, or that I did a good job teaching them or whatever, then I think it keeps me going. Like, yeah, I want to continue doing this. So yeah, it's been nice. And I recently had a Rice student. I guess she's just super motivated, but she randomly started emailing clinics and asking for a place to rotate for a couple of weeks or something. And so I'm very thankful that because Baylor wanted me to teach their med students, like I have that academic affiliation. So I guess I've also had like nurse practitioner students and med students from other schools in Texas that need a spot to rotate and stuff like that. So it's very gratifying to teach. And then I think ultimately the best feeling is when you feel like you showed somebody like a whole career opportunity, or open somebody's eyes to an opportunity that they may not have known about or considered.
So I guess moving on to general life questions, how when and where did you get married, and how did you meet your partner?
So we also went to that Korean American church. And then very tragically though, like we actually got divorced in 2019. So Gina and I got married in 2006. So I was in between the first and second year of med school. And then she was a teacher. And then we had our children in 2009, 2012, and then 2016. So like 2 daughters were born while I was in residency, which was very challenging, I think, because residency it's tough. Like there's the 80-hour work week, and then just a lot of like, it's every month is different. Like you rotate to a different part of the hospital. So I think that added a lot of stress to life. But yeah, I mean, there are a lot of difficult marriage structural issues that we didn't address very well, I think. So that's been challenging since 2019 or 2018, I guess. But she's wonderful. Like she's a great mother, and I think our daughters are doing pretty well. The oldest one is is going to start 7th grade, and then 4th grade, and then the youngest one's starting kindergarten. Um, so yeah, I guess I'm just thankful, like, well, even though things were hard, like, I guess my main priority, I feel like, should be that my children do well and feel supported and loved from both parents and stuff like that. So I think they feel that way right now. But yeah, so I don't know. I think a lot of my identity, I guess I started going to that church in college, and then I felt like a lot of my identity and just a lot of my day-to-day life like revolved around that world. And when the marriage started crumbling, like it really rocked my whole world because it was kind of tied into all these other aspects of my social life. Um, so yeah, so then now I guess for 2 years, 2.5 years or so, it's been like different kind of rebuilding without that. But it's been good. And I'm also thankful in that regard. I think that I didn't leave Houston because I still have like high school friends here. And like one of my best friends now is a guy from the Japanese American Citizens League days that like I always felt kind of bad. Like I don't have enough time to devote to these causes or hang out with this guy um, back then. But then now I have more time. And so I'm very thankful that I still have that connection, I guess, and geographically that I'm still here where these people from my life at different points I can still reconnect with and stuff.
Yeah, sure. I guess, what is your favorite part of having children?
Uh, I think you, I guess I don't want to say something inflammatory. I feel like it's a natural desire in most human beings to pass on your wisdom, your life experiences, or whatever, and invest in um, people who come after you. And like, of course, you can do that in many ways, like teaching the med students and whatever, like mentoring people in other ways can be very rewarding too. But like, to me personally, there hasn't been anything quite on the level of having your own child to have to take care of, like to be completely dependent and then watch them grow up and stuff. So I think it challenges me to be the best man I can be. And like, um, I guess I think it's something that, whereas in other areas of life, like I might work really hard at something and then feel exhausted and question if it's really okay, if this is right, or should I quit? Like with children, like you would never think about quitting on them. So it's like, yeah, this is painful, this is awful, like, but it's worth it. Like there's no question that it's the right thing to do, or that if they need more, like, yeah, I should give them more. So yeah, so I think it's nice to have something so challenging but so, amazing and beautiful to see as like your children growing up and achieving things,
Yeah,
making you proud.
yeah. Has the experience of raising your own children given you further insight into being a pediatrician?
Yeah, for sure. I think what we generally say at work is um, there's a lot of things that are true in theory, that we could dispense as advice to parents. Um, but until you try to put that theory in practice and do it, you don't understand, I guess, the challenge of like the balancing everything else. So for example, it's easy to like have a perfect idea of like what food should you feed to children for health, or like choking hazard safety, what car seat usage you would suggest to ideally protect all the occupants of your car at their ages and all kinds of collisions. what sleep schedule would be ideal for like a family or children, to babies as they grow, and then adults in the house. But like, even though there is kind of an answer for these things, until you've lived it, I guess, like you tried to pack the car up for a vacation with the car seats involved, or until you've tried to like feed three daughters at the same time and make sure they're eating their veggies, or make sure everybody's needs are taken care of. Until you've like juggled all that, I don't think it's as easy to say like, oh yeah, you should do this, and I know you can do this. And so I think it makes us kind of back off more and understand like, hey, here's a recommendation, here's generally some good ideas, but like, you, the parent, are going to have to find the best balance for you and your family and your child. And then like, it's more of like, I'm supporting you, I'm going to make suggestions, but I would never judge you. I mean, short of some horrible thing, but like, because now I know how hard it can be. And I think, unfortunately, even like if my marriage didn't work out, like that also has been kind of helpful, I guess, in making me more compassionate, or less proud, because yeah, I think there's kind of a stigma with that too, right? And I have a lot of patients whose parents aren't together one way or another, and so again, like that makes everything much harder. Like if you have a single parent trying to do all this stuff to take good care of their children, um, I guess I think of it as like, well, not that I understand exactly, but like maybe what some people feel about race or about sexual orientation or something, like there might be like bias, like, oh, like for example, you should brush teeth for your children while your partner draws the bath, and then you can have one person like do the bath and hand the child to the other person and whatever. Like, so there might be a lot of things that we kind of have on autopilot or whatever, as like, oh yeah, here's how this could work or whatever. And then it turns out like, oh yeah, sorry, that's not going to work for you, is it? Because you are a single parent. So sorry, I said all that. So I think it kind of helps me now also commiserate or empathize better.
Yeah. I guess, what is the most difficult part of having three daughters?
Mm, I guess I can't, I know I can't make everybody happy at the same time. So like, there's really not much I can do. I will never make like one meal for them, or have one type of vacation for them, or one schedule for them that they're all going to equally love. Or even like if we're trying to watch something like a Raya and the Last Dragon recently, the movie, like two of them were okay with it, one of them wasn't, like, um, so yeah, I think it's just hard to deal with the fact that like, okay, I have to make a decision that not everybody's going to be happy with. And then I just have to try to be fair or rotate or whatever. But I think, yeah, on the flip side, like that's how life is, right? Like if you were the president of the United States, like this is why we have a democratic system. Like you can't make everybody happy. Everybody has different needs or wants. And so you have to make the best decision you can, and then kind of trust the process, and over time earn people's trust, I guess.
Um, I guess, changing to the topic of church. So, you were active in various church ministries. Can you describe your experiences in these ministries?
Yeah, I think the thing, honestly, that I love the most would be going on international medical mission trips. Probably because of where it all started for me back in 2003. So from like 2013 to 18, I went to this village in Mexico, like southeast Mexico. like 6 times, I think. Um, so yeah, pretty much every year except for the 2016 because my daughter Livy was born that year. And it was like really awesome. Like it was a mission base where they have a bunch of facilities and like schools and clinic and projects and stuff. But then if you come with an international team of people, then they will use the resources you bring to go to like a really remote, usually a mountaintop village, where there's like no access to medical care pretty much. And then you can like help in whatever way you can, you know. But the nice thing is, unlike some of my other, like honestly, the experience in 2003 was much more like jump in and jump out. Because this is affiliated with a mission base, it was, you know, like there's much more continuity. Like, yeah, we're here for a week helping out and doing whatever we can do, but like the people who are driving up this mountain with us are native people who live here who are going to reconnect with this community, or who like planted a church nearby, and so they're going to have like ongoing contact with the people that we're helping. Or if I had a patient who really needed surgery or something, where it's like, okay, well, I'm not going to be able to do that today. Um, at least we had a follow-up plan. We can connect you with somebody, you know. Um, so yeah, I guess I really thought they had a nice, well thought out, well organized structure. Um, and then yeah, that New Life Fellowship Church, like their main thing is like these house churches that meet on Friday, and so I did a lot of that, where you just meet with a small group on Friday and try to reach out to people and invite them. um, and then I did work on the drama team where I would do dramas and like silly, mostly like humorous, but videos and stuff like that. And then that was with like multimedia, where you're like projecting like lyrics for the songs and stuff like that. So yeah, I did a lot of different things. But yeah, I think the thing that I really resonated with the most was the going overseas. I've been to several other countries, like some of the like closed Asian countries where you're not supposed to be a Christian missionary. And then Japan once as a church project. And yeah, so I think again, just being able to see the world and kind of like see how other people live is super important for us, especially in the US. And then, yeah, to me, it was important to do it in a Christian church context because I wanted to help people in that way.
So did you start going to church with your family since you were a child, or were you inspired to start going later on in life?
Yeah, I actually didn't go until the white man who was studying Chinese, my friend Jonathan, invited me to his Chinese church. Um, I think it was my junior year of high school or something, or after, yeah, I think the summer after junior year of high school. So I was kind of like, I guess the seeds were planted or whatever, but that's why when I got to college, I was very interested in exploring that more. And I started going to church with um, that good friend from Rice who was Korean. And so he went to the New Life, the Korean church.
How do you think your religion kind of ties
Oh,
into
hold on. I think I can't hear.
Sorry.
Oh,
Okay. How do you think your religion I kind of like ties into your choice to become a physician or like your occupation?
yeah. I mean, I guess I saw it as a lot of like, if there's a purpose for my life, like, so if like God made me for a reason, then I should have like a calling, right? Like, there's kind of like not like one right answer or whatever, but it should be kind of obvious that like, oh yeah, I'm where I'm supposed to be, or I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. And so I think when I went on that original medical mission trip, that's something that jumped out at me, like, I guess in contrast to, okay, well, if I get a job where I work for a company and I do like financial analysis, like I could try to do a really good job and maximize the profit for that company. But then it's like, and that could be fine, but is it what I'm supposed to be doing? Like, am I going to go to work every day thinking like, yes, I like did something that made me feel uh, of value to this world? Um, and so I think having the religious beliefs that, okay, I got to find my purpose, made it jump out at me when that opportunity to be like, oh, if you're a physician, you could do this work, like where you go out to people who need a lot of help and really have nothing, and you can offer them something wonderful. And then, yeah, like I think again, going through the process, it was like looking at different kinds of specialties and stuff. But I think I just really like pediatrics because it's pretty easy to say like, hey, like if God made all of us and these children that you have here are part of that, then help me work with you to make their life as great as possible. Like it's a natural flow, I think, to be kind of a religious person and a pediatrician. Um, and you know you can be a Christian and be all kinds of jobs, but for me it seemed to be like the right fit, and it made sense too to me to be like, oh, maybe this was the plan all along. Like I had to like do all that like crazy pseudo Asian study stuff and study abroad or whatever. If I had been pre-med, I probably would have been like, oh no, I don't have time for that. I have to be more goal driven, and that would be a detour. But like because it happened the way it happened, now I have a job where I use that language skill that I learned and worked hard at, for something that I wouldn't have been able to imagine. Um, so I was like, oh, okay, maybe that was the plan all along, you know?
Yeah. Um, so, do people make assumptions about you as a doctor based on your racial identity or?
Um, yeah, I mean, I haven't gotten a lot of like negative experiences that I can remember, but I think it's more just amusing because I'm like more ambiguous. Like they don't know what my background is. And so I have, for example, like I speak some Korean and some Mandarin. So when I have patients who speak those languages and I use those languages, I think they tend to assume like, oh, you look maybe half whatever we are and half a white person. And then, yeah, I've even had Japanese families where they didn't know I was half. And so they think, wow, this is just a American man who grew up here and randomly learned Japanese. Like that's amazing. But then if they do learn I'm half, my mom was Japanese American, but they assume my mom like spoke Japanese and taught me Japanese. So I have to say like, oh no, I just learned like in college. But then also when I speak Spanish, I think a lot of people think I'm from a South American country or some part of Mexico or something. Um, and so, yeah, I guess I like that. I think it's hard to pigeonhole me in one way. So, in Houston being so diverse, like something I very much enjoy is having like a schedule of patients all day and then thinking like, oh wow, like there's just all kinds of people on this roster. And I try to treat everybody the same, and everybody's living in harmony for the most part here. Like I think it's a nice microcosm, for what the world can be or should be, or what this country should be.
Yeah. So the Asian American community kind of has a stigma against mental health issues. Um, what do you think should be done for like Asian Americans to kind of pay more attention to mental health, or is it kind of harder to treat Asian Americans with mental health issues compared to like?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think I'm doing this interview because of because of the rabbit hole that started when I was forwarded this email asking about mental health resources for Asian American pediatric patients in Houston. So yeah, I think the hard part is finding providers who look like the patients is harder. One of my friends from Rice, or I guess there's a girl that I was friends with in my class from Rice who was always pre-med, and her older brother also went to Rice and was pre-med, and he became a child adolescent psychiatrist. And so he's like a great resource, but he's in the Clear Lake area, so like not close to my part of Houston. Just as an example, but like he's pretty rare, right? Like he's an English speaking Vietnamese American doctor in the mental health field. So yeah, I think part of the problem is finding more providers who look like the community that they came from, can serve, or be like kind of a normalizing force. The same thing happens with like other persons of color. Like it's really hard to find Black physicians in certain specialties and stuff. And for the most part, patients are more comfortable with somebody who kind of looks like them or culturally gets their background. But I think there is a real stigma. There's a real problem with like for Asians in Asia, and then I guess when they immigrate, especially like the first generation to second generation, I think it is not very commonplace to seek mental health services like therapy and stuff. I guess it's seen as weakness or something. So yeah, I think the best way is just to get more stories out there, like normalize it, and have then you have a better opportunity that like say a struggling tween or teenager who's Asian American would say, oh well, like I saw a YouTube video or on social media, like I saw somebody that comes from a background like mine that looks like me, and they had a successful history with going to a psychiatrist or getting therapy after something bad happened to them or whatever. Like, oh, it's okay, because I don't really think we can easily convince the immigrant parents. I think that's much more difficult. Not to say we shouldn't try, but it's it's kind of like teaching an old dog new tricks, I guess. But I think having like Asian American college students speak up and say like, oh, hey, I was going through this and that, and I found help, and it was really beneficial, and I'm not ashamed of it, and I would recommend it, would help other people who are more like wavering think, okay, yeah, there's nothing wrong with this. This is good. This is not bad. Like, yeah. So more examples, I guess.
Yeah. I guess finally, do you have a vision of how you want to lead? Maybe not the rest of your life, but where you want to be in the next few years and in the future?
Honestly, I guess right now, because my life has changed a lot in the past few years, I don't think I would want to change like my profession, my workplace, or anything, because I love Blue Fish Pediatrics and the people I work with, and I love teaching med students. So I think that has kept me going. I think regardless what happens to me in my life, yeah, like work going well, like taking good care of my patients, and then my daughters thriving are the priorities. But yeah, I guess if I were to, get remarried and restart in life in that way, like with a new partner, like that would be great. But yeah, but I think priority wise, it would be like my children, since I feel like very responsible to make sure they have the best life they can have. And then work, I probably wouldn't change. Um, and then I will hope that the rest falls into place nicely too.
Yeah. So that's all the questions from my end. Is there anything I might have missed or anything you'd like to add?
No, I think that's pretty good.